Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday night edition of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. With me, as always, is Mike Tagliere. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good. It's weird. This is one of those weeks where we waited as long as we could to record because we don't want to be recording when the Sunday night game starts. But at the same time, this Packers-Rams game is still going on. And knowing I had a lot of DFS stock in the Packers, needless to say, I'm pretty attached to this game.
Yeah, so if you hear some very random screeches going on just in the middle, it's just if something good is going on there. Yeah, we try to do this in between the afternoon games and the Sunday night games so we don't have to miss any football and we can get it out. And unfortunately, the game's running a little late, but that's what we got to do. We power on. So listen, if you've listened to enough podcasts, you're probably aware that as a general matter, there's an outline for an episode. Usually the host will send the guest some sort of basic outline saying, by the way, here's what we're going to talk about. We'll probably talk about this group of players. But with these recaps, Tags and I usually can't do that. We're both watching football all day. Then we pop on this show during the break in the games to give our rapid reaction. That's why it's spontaneous. And according to my wife, mildly charming. But today we're going to mix it up a little bit because we're essentially at the halfway point of the season. So we thought that it would be kind of fun to give out a few mid-season awards. So now don't worry, we're still going to get into all the game recaps and all that. But to start it off, we're going to be talking about a few players who have stood out to us one way or another. Now, before we get into that, I do want to remind everybody that we do have our signed Davante Adams Packers helmet giveaway. You can submit an entry in 30 seconds by just going on to fantasypros.com/contest, which will tell you exactly what to do. Now, like all our signed giveaways, this one comes from Pristine Auction. And if you like football memorabilia, you really need to be going to pristineauction.com, and you need to be doing it immediately. They auction off hundreds of guaranteed authentic items every single day. And the best part is that because there are so many auctions, you can find ridiculous deals. Yesterday, I saw a Todd Gurley signed Rams jersey for $95, an Antonio Brown signed Steelers jersey for $86, and a DeAndre Hopkins signed Texans helmet for $110. Now, the best thing about all those great prices is that is it. That is all you're paying. You don't pay to register to the site. You don't pay to bid on an item. You just pay whatever your winning bid is. So go to pristineauction.com now, and I guarantee you're going to love it. That's PRISTINE auction.com. Don't forget to tell them that you heard about them from Fantasy Pros so we can keep doing things like the Davante Adams giveaway. All right, Tags. So here is how Tags and I did it. Tags said, hey, let's do like a mid-season award show. I said, great. So I forwarded him a couple of awards that are really kind of generic. And Tags came back with a bunch of celebrity-filled crazy awards. So we're going to go through both. You'll know which ones are Tags and which ones are mine. Now, the one thing I'll say is, as the host of the show, I am tasked with moving us along at a reasonable speed. So I reserve the right to just agree with Tags and not give a separate player. And in the podcasting world, the host is kind of king. So y'all are stuck with it, all right? So let's get started. And this was obviously my very generic basic award. Tags, who is your first half fantasy MVP?
It's Todd Gurley, and it's not really all that close. I mean, we have a guy that's legitimately on pace to break LaDainian Tomlinson's touchdown record of 28 touchdowns. It seems like Sean McVay is doing everything in his power to keep him on the field to do that. Last week, we had him against the 49ers team that they were crushing, and then they had him in the fourth quarter to score his second touchdown. So, yeah, Todd Gurley is easily, hands down, the most valuable player over the first half of the season.
Well, I don't know how this game's going to end, but I think he only has one touchdown so far this game, so I'm a little disappointed, frankly, with what he's doing. For me, I'll say James Conner. And basically, it's much more about where he was drafted versus what he's given you. He was essentially an afterthought, even very close to draft time. I had an auction 2 days before the season started where I got him with my last pick for $1 with my last bid. So he's sort of a guy who, if you got, you've essentially been given the equivalent of a first-round player. He had another huge game today, and we'll probably talk about it a little later. I'm not really all that concerned about his long-term value this season. So for me, James Conner is my MVP. Tags, how about your fantasy LVP?
I mean, that's the thing is I tried to keep it to someone that was drafted in like the first 5 rounds, and I didn't want to do Le'Veon Bell because it just seemed like too obvious. So I went with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is someone that was drafted, in a lot of leagues that in standard format anyways, he was drafted in either the third or the fourth round, almost never lasted beyond that. And he's a guy that honestly belongs on waiver wires right now. Like, his team is not playing very well. The offensive line has had injuries on it. They haven't played very well. Marcus Mariota isn't clearing any defenders out of that box, and Derrick Henry just looks like he's running in mud. So, we've talked about it in the show where he's droppable.
I had the exact same pick and the exact same analysis because you're right. Essentially, he was, I thought frankly, if we said that people might think, well, he's not quote-unquote high-end enough to be an LVP. But yeah, he was in ADP. He was the 35th overall pick. And even in our expert consensus rankings, he was the 20th running back. He was not an afterthought. He was kind of an integral part of most fantasy teams. So absolutely, the only person right around him who was drafted who's been healthy all year and a bust is Amari Cooper. And we have talked way too much about Amari Cooper, but that's the bottom line. Everybody else has, if they've either been injured or they've given you pretty decent fantasy production. So good call on that. He is also my LVP. How about tags? We make a lot of rankings. We rank players. We kind of plan our flags. Who is the player you were most wrong on coming into the season?
This one's really easy for me. It's Adam Thielen. He was someone that I have no stock in. I had Stephon Diggs, I think, as my number 11 receiver going into the season. I had Thielen down at like number 19 or 20. I felt like Diggs was the receiver to own there, and I could not be more wrong. And the thing is I was quick to turn around on it, because when you see Thielen getting all those targets and producing with Cousins, it was clear that those two had a relationship from the get-go, that Pat Shurmur wasn't the one that created Adam Thielen. Like, that was kind of like my idea for Adam Thielen, was that he only started producing when Pat Shurmur took over as the offensive coordinator. So to see him produce over the first couple of weeks, it was like, okay, I need to quickly do a 180. And ever since then, I've been playing Adam Thielen in like all my DFS lineups.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about it a couple of times already. I have no problem with making him your number one wide receiver going forward. I mean, he's 1 or 2 for me, because this is not coming to an end. It certainly doesn't seem like it. I also have Thielen on 0 teams, and sort of for similar reasons. So that's a good one. I'm a little lower end, but it was a guy who I basically owned in every single league, and that was Keelan Cole. I talked him up huge as a sleeper coming into the season. I had him basically on every sleeper list. I really bought into the reports about him in camp, that he looked really good. And not only that, but that last season with his pretty decent production, he didn't even know the offense. He was just kind of running around schoolyard playing. He was still doing that. And I really did feel that he would take the next step. He has been terrible, and it's only gotten worse. I mean, today he had another fumble, another bunch of drops. I think he was benched during the second half of the game. So for me, again, it's not somebody who cost you anything or anything like that, but he was somebody who I was much higher than expert consensus on, and I take a big L on that one. But on the other side of the ball, how about the player you were most right on?
This one I had to think about, because there was like a few guys, like a lot of people have given me credit for Saquon, saying that I would take him number 3. Like, I would only take Gurley and Le'Veon Bell over Saquon Barkley this year. I had him at number 3 in my rankings, but I'm not going to go with that because it's still close to what his ECR was. So I'm going to go with Sony Michel. Sony Michel was someone I never budged off of, even when he hurt his knee and that he missed, like, it was like a month of the preseason. I didn't budge because I knew the offense he played on. I knew the talent level, and eventually opportunity would be there, because Rex Burkhead is not like a workhorse running back, and James White, while he's a receiver, I didn't see him getting more than 5 to 8 carries per game. So Sony Michel was someone that before the injury I was drafting in the 4th round of redraft leagues, and then after the injury he was falling to like the 7th, 8th round sometimes, and it was like an easy pick for me. So I'll go Sony Michel here.
Yeah, you definitely talked him up in the preseason. I do remember that, partly because I wasn't super high on Sony Michel. I just didn't think, I thought Rex Burkhead would factor in. Burkhead got injured, so that makes a difference, certainly. But for me, again, much lower end than you, but for me, the player I was most right on was actually Austin Eckler. He was a pretty standard late round pick for me in nearly every league. And forget about the quote unquote handcuff to Melvin Gordon. I kept thinking about Ken Whisenhunt, and I kept thinking back to the 2013 season in particular with Danny Woodhead, right? I mean, he loved just the change of pace back. The guy would figure into the passing game, and most of the leagues I play in at this point are half-point PPR, and I really felt like he was just going to be a guy who you can kind of plug in there as a flex most weeks, and that's exactly what he's been. So to the extent you listened, you heard my advice and you listened to drafting Austin Eckler with one of your late-round picks, you're probably pretty happy. So I will take the win on that one. Now, what about the player who you think is going to be much more valuable in the second half, not including guys who have had obvious changes in situation, like Nick Chubb, for example?
Right. Yeah, no, I went with someone. I'm going to go with Kenyon Drake. A lot of people were debating dropping him after the first half of the season. Obviously, over the last couple of weeks, there's been a resurgence in his fantasy outlook, because you look at Detroit, you look at Houston, he obviously throws up at least 14.5 PPR standard points in those games. He's being more involved in the passing game, and that's really a positive when you look at it. Like, Albert Wilson is going to be out for the rest of the season. Kenny Stills is dealing with a soft tissue injury. Danny Amendola is what he is. Jakeem Grant is like 5'6". Devontae Parker might be traded. So I don't think that there's any way that you avoid him in the passing game. And he's looked really good on the ground too. Like, Frank Gore is older, and he's someone who's going to wear down as the season goes on. He's 35 years old now. So looking at Kenyon Drake, what he's averaged over the last 4 weeks, it's hard for them to keep him out of the lineup. So I do believe that he's going to end up living up to that low end RB2, draft value that basically where people drafted him as. So I think Kenyon Drake is my guy that is more valuable in the second half.
From your lips to Adam Gase's ears, my friend. I really hope that that's true, and I think all fantasy owners are kind of hoping for that. For me, I'll take a guy who we have talked about a couple of times already on the podcast, and that's Keenan Allen. First, let's just get rid of a myth. Keenan Allen is not killing you right now. Okay, he was the 28th ranked receiver in standard leagues. That is not the worst thing in the world. And remember, we talked about this a little bit before too. First half of 2017, 40 receptions, 548 yards, and 1 score. He's played 7 games so far, but if you give him 8, he would have 47 receptions, 578 yards, and 1 score. So he's actually having a better first half this year than he did last year. And the second half of last year, 62 receptions, 845 yards, 5 touchdown catches. I'm not saying that he's going to repeat that, but he's going to be getting more involved. He's healthy. He's still getting the targets. I haven't moved off him at all for this season. I've tried to keep him up there pretty closely in rest of season rankings. I think he's in for a big second half. Player who will be much less valuable in the second half. Tags, who do you got?
I'm going to stand by this one, and I know like a lot of people called me a homer before the season, but I'll say it's Mitch Trubisky. The thing is, I'm able to properly evaluate any team, and that includes the Chicago Bears for those haters out there. But Mitch Trubisky hasn't been very good. Like he is developing into one of the more mobile quarterbacks in the NFL, like where it's like he's not a run first quarterback. He's not, someone like that would drop back like Vic and then just like hit the back of his 5-step drop and then take off running. Trubisky is someone who's going to scramble in the pocket. He's going to move around and then he's going to take off running if he has to. And because of that, he's the second leading rusher in the NFL, just behind Cam Newton. He's only, I think it's like 15 yards behind Newton at this point in time. So everything looks good there. His passer rating is one of the best in the NFL. It's close to 100. He's got a 15 touchdown to 6 interception ratio. He's had an easy schedule for the most part, but he just, if you actually sit down and watch Trubisky play, he has not played nearly as well as his numbers say he has. So he's someone that he's the number 5 fantasy quarterback right now, and I do not see him finishing even top 8. So I'm going to go ahead and say he's outside the top 12 if you just play out games 9 through 17.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. For me, it's Deshaun Jackson. I know he caught another touchdown pass today, but he was the 13th ranked wide receiver coming in. I didn't trust Jameis Winston's deep ball. I'm not exactly sure if Jameis Winston will be the ones throwing the ball anymore in Tampa Bay, but we will talk about that in a bit. He has to contend with targets with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, O.J. Howard, Cameron Brate. Adam Humphries had a nice game today. So I've ranked him pretty consistently as a low-end wide receiver 3 going forward, and that's basically where I'd keep him. All right, everyone, that was the end of my awards. As you can see, pretty straight. And we are now going into Tags awards. So let's start with number 1, the player who you'd leave your wife for.
The Man Crush of the Year award goes to Todd Gurley. If there's one football player I'd leave my wife for today, it'd be Todd Gurley, because the dude is he's straight up sexy when it comes to fantasy, man. He's a guy that if you drafted, and the reason I gave him most valuable player, I understand that if you didn't have the number 1 or number 2 or number 3 pick, you had no chance at him. But at the same time, if you have Todd Gurley on your team and you are not in the playoff picture right now, you legitimately need to quit fantasy football.
Yeah, we talked about it last week as well. I thought it was whoever had the number 1 pick. You reminded me that not everyone with the number 1 pick actually took Todd Gurley, which I don't understand, but I agree. If you have Todd Gurley, it's almost impossible to not be in the playoffs. Personally, frankly, it's ridiculous. I would never leave my wife for any player. She's the greatest woman in the world. All right, she was walking right by my studio. Truthfully, I would leave my wife for one of those like week 13 wins, that you really need to get into the playoffs. If you offered me one of those and I needed it absolutely, then I'd leave my wife, because whatever. For me, my person was Adrian Peterson, and I'm just pointing this out because he was still, even when he was signed by the Redskins, even when you knew he was going to be getting a lot of carries, he was really a late round pick. He is awesome. He was 12th ranked running back on the season coming into this week. He had another big week, and if you read the story about how his shoulder popped out, now he popped it back in. I mean, it's not game script. It's like he's running incredibly, incredibly well. So he's really impressed me. So for that, I have a quote-unquote man crush on him. The player you are officially divorcing. Tags.
I'm going to go with Davante Parker. This one was close, and I know some people are going to be listening and thinking, why would you want to divorce Davante Parker after the game he just had on Thursday night? Well, I'm just kind of done with the Dolphins right now as a team, and I don't think that they're going to trade Davante Parker knowing the injuries that they've had. And do I think that he's going to deliver consistent fantasy results? Like, if you look at the Dolphins this year, look at Kenny Stills, you look at Albert Wilson, Danny Amendola, even Kenyon Drake, you go through all these options and you're like, have any of them been consistent? And the answer would be no. None of them have. So Devontae Parker staying in Miami is like one of the worst things for his fantasy value. So he's someone that I attach my name to. He was probably one of my biggest misses of the year, just because I felt like he would turn into something. But at this time, I'm going to divorce him because I think we've reached the point where we can no longer get back to where we were when we first fell in love.
That's really interesting considering how big his game is, but I like it. I like the boldness in light of that. For me, it's Bell. I mean, I don't really think that needs much explanation. He's pretty much tanked fantasy teams. I do not see him giving much value going forward. So for me, I am done with Le'Veon Bell. Number 3, the Leonardo DiCaprio award tags. I assume this is your most underrated fantasy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I like it though. I do like the spin on that one. Yeah.
It's definitely most underrated. I'm going to go with Geronimo Allison. I know he's not having a game today, but coming into this game today, like he averaged more fantasy points per game than Keenan Allen, than Brandon Cooks. And like these are guys that are like were legitimate, like top, like guys that were drafted in the top 2 rounds of fantasy drafts. And Geronimo Allison was someone who, even towards the end of the preseason, I had no idea why Geronimo Allison was falling into like the 13th, 14th round when he was clearly the number 2 wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers. So for me, completely underappreciated. The article I read about waiver wire stuff, he was on waiver wires in like it was 72% of leagues this past Friday when I wrote that article. So it's like people just, they don't realize what they have in him. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, he is extremely underappreciated.
I like it. For me, it's going to be Phillip Rivers. I get that quarterback is deep, but the dude does it every single year, and half the time he's just undrafted. He's a 4th-ranked quarterback coming into this week. He could be higher if not for the fact that Melvin Gordon can take it in from any time you get close to the goal line. So for me, a guy like Phillip Rivers, frankly, his entire career, but I feel like he's generally, especially this year, has been underrated as a fantasy asset. And on the flip side, I Kim Kardashian award, I don't think that needed much explanation. That's the most overrated fantasy football asset tags. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. The Kim Kardashian award goes to Christian McCaffrey. So the thing is I know there's going to be people that are taking shots at me and telling me that he's still a top 10 running back in fantasy. That's fine. I mean, look at the players that are in the top 10. Like TJ Yeldon has more fantasy points, PPR points, mind you, than Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey has not topped 100 total yards in any of his last 4 games. I think it might be 5 games now. Even though he had 2 touchdowns against Baltimore, if you actually watch that game, basically the first touchdown, he ran into the back of his offensive lineman, kind of bounced back, and it seemed like the Ravens defenders thought the play was over because they couldn't see him behind what was happening. He bounced the run out, and kudos to him for keeping the play alive. Ran in for a touchdown. The second one was on a pass that was intended for Devin Funchess, got tipped up into the air, and it happened to land right in the hands of Christian McCaffrey in the end zone. So that was his second touchdown. So many people are telling me that this guy was a buy low. I still think he's a sell high. I think he is the most overrated fantasy football asset because I don't think he's going to win you a fantasy football league.
Well, we have talked about McCaffrey a lot. I'm glad you did point that out because people are going to look at his game log today and say, wow, he did good. Yeah, especially, the first touchdown I'll give him credit for because he almost looked like he kind of hid behind the guy and then just went, all right, I'm out of here, which is fine because he's small. But the second one was legitimately tipped up into the air randomly. He was not the target. So certainly that's a good point. For me, real briefly, I'll just say Tom Brady. I mean, he is still a phenomenal football player, generally speaking. But, I feel like at this point, he really just cares about championships. He doesn't care about his numbers at all. He's a 13th ranked quarterback coming in. Given the state of QB at this point, I no longer feel like he's this absolute critical must-start option. So for me, as terms of a most overrated fantasy football asset for this year, I would say Tom Brady. Please don't at me with hate stuff about Tom Brady. I think he's great. No, nobody yell at me. Okay, number 5. The Cracked Out Award. Go ahead and explain this one, Tag.
This is the player that makes you lose your mind. Basically, like you just feel like you're cracked out. Every time you're trying to figure out what's going to happen with this guy, you literally just can't figure it out, and you lose your mind. So you end up being all cracked out. So I'm giving this award to Alex Collins. It seems like no matter what week you try and predict what's going to happen to him, you just can't do it. I mean, like more recently, we've seen him getting more touches than Buck Allen, and it's a step in the right direction. But if you look at the red zone numbers, each of them are getting carries in the red zone almost equal. And then he scores a touchdown against Carolina, and you're like, okay. He scored a touchdown, I think it was against the Saints last week, and it's just like that's a team that had allowed like 1 rushing touchdown all year. So it's like when you're trying to figure out Alex Collins, you can't do it. And it's like, should I buy him? Should I sell him? What should I do with him? So he's the player that makes me lose my mind when I'm trying to put together rankings. Yeah,
that's a good one. Actually, for me, that would be Kenyon Drake. And again, he had the big game this past week, but one of the touchdowns was on a wide receiver pass where he just he actually really well done for play design. He hung out for a while before making his move up the sideline. I feel like I have gone from buy to sell constantly with him. So I feel like he's sort of my guy who would fit that. And your final award, Tags, is the Rick Astley Award. And let me just see if I've got this right. Is this the player who never gonna give you up, never gonna, is that it? Is that what we're doing right now?
Yes, but this player always seems to let me down, but it's Amari Cooper. Nobody should be surprised by this one, but I am never going to give you up, Amari. Welcome to Dallas. I was actually looking at this, going into next week. Obviously, Amari was on a bye week, but Amari's schedule looks mighty tasty. It's always tough to trust a player that is going to a new offense, learning with a new quarterback and all that stuff, but I am never going to give you up. So Amari Cooper, here is your Rick Astley Award.
Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to you. I think it was with Justin Boone on Monday's show when you heard the news break of Amari Cooper and you were just totally losing your mind. Yeah. It was actually great to see in real time. For me, it's Collins. You mentioned him. He sort of has had a relatively pedestrian first half, but he has been in the game relatively consistently in the red zone. He fumbled today, but he continued to get carries after that, and the fumble wasn't really his fault. He was completely blown up behind the line of scrimmage. But for me, really, for Collins, and the thing I've always had in the back of my mind when I've been thinking about his rest of season value is his schedule. After his bye week in Week 10, Week 11 he gets the Bengals, 28th against the run. Week 12 the Raiders, 22nd against the run. Week 13 the Falcons, 30th against the run. Week 14 the Chiefs, 31st against the run. And Week 15 the Bucks, 24th against the run. So he's got a really, really, really nice slate of games going on there. And for me, I think the Ravens they have to know that their offense just runs better when he's on the field. So he's a guy who I'm going to stick with. I'm going to go down with the ship if anything goes wrong. So all right, Tags, I'm going to take it back. Your awards were much better than mine, and I really enjoyed it. So way to go. I liked it. Way to go. But we are a little now behind on our game recap, so I'm going to move you at lightning speed. Let's start, as always, with the Thursday night game. Texans 42, Dolphins 23. I feel like, frankly, Tags, we could spend a half hour on this game by itself. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay out the major developments for you, and you get to give me your reaction to one of these things, okay? Mm-hmm. You ready?
Yep.
Deshaun Watson threw 5 touchdown passes and looked completely healthy. DeAndre Hopkins caught 2 touchdown passes and made one of the most preposterous catches in the history of football, but was wiped out by a penalty. Will Fuller had a big game, but tore his ACL and is out for the season. Kenyon Drake, as we talked about, had 12 carries for just the third time this season, scored 2 touchdowns, and Davante Parker, who you also talked about, was not only active, but caught 6 passes for 134 yards. You get one thing to talk about. Go.
Deshaun Watson, I'm going to consider him a sell high. Because coming off a game where he threw 5 touchdowns, I mean, look at his game log before this, guys. Like, he's thrown 1 touchdown in 4 of the previous 7 games. He maxed out at 2 touchdowns before that. So he was relying on a lot of volume, and this offense going forward with Will Fuller gone, when you take a look at Deshaun Watson's splits with and without Will Fuller, he hasn't been the same quarterback without Fuller. And knowing that Kiki QT is still dealing with a hamstring injury, DeAndre Hopkins is only one man. He can only do so much. The run game has done nothing. That offensive line is still terrible. Watson has been running a little bit less because of this whole rib and chest injury. He hasn't topped 14 rushing yards in 3 weeks. So Deshaun Watson is someone that I'm going to sell high on, while people, because that's the thing, is primetime bias is a real thing. People will buy a player just because they've seen it in person, and every single person that wanted to watch this game was able to watch this game. So I'm selling Deshaun Watson at a premium.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was encouraged by how healthy he looked, but I agree. I have not been a buyer on Watson for most of the season. He really is not running. He ran a little bit in this game, but he's not running nearly as much as kind of he needs to be able to be the fantasy asset that fantasy owners expected. The one thing I'll add for me, because what caught my eye, obviously Will Fuller being out for the season stinks, but I do think, immediately after that game, what I did, I picked up Kiki QT because he's going to be a valuable fantasy asset. He's hurt. He missed the game. But assuming that he comes back next week against the Broncos or, thereafter, he should be a pretty valuable fantasy asset. So Kiki QT is somebody who, to the extent he is available, and he was available in pretty much every one of my leagues at this point, I think you should go pick him up.
I wouldn't be shocked if they signed Des Bryant either. That's a name to keep an eye on.
At this point in the season, man, I guess.
They're a contender. And they need bodies.
It's fair. It's a fair point. Eagles 24, Jaguars 18 in London. Now, if you missed it, Blake Bortles got back to London and was brilliant, as he always... That's a lie. Bortles was terrible. He did somewhat salvage his fantasy day. He had a touchdown and 43 yards rushing, but he is just a terrible NFL quarterback. I'm sure he's one of the top 30 quarterbacks in the world or something, but he's terrible for an NFL quarterback. I don't really actually think there's much to talk about with the Jaguars. They barely ran the ball. Dede Westbrook had the touchdown, but he just had 2 catches.
Carlos Hyde is nothing. And that's the thing is I didn't start him in any leagues that I own Carlos Hyde in. I was trying to trade him before all this stuff happened. He's going to be literally an afterthought in this offense with Leonard Fournette coming back after the bye.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. He'll see it. I mean, it was a tough matchup. to be fair, and he hasn't been there very long. But I agree, you should not have been starting Carlos Hyde this week. But let's do something productive with our time and talk about the Eagles and specifically the running backs. Josh Adams actually leads the team this week with 9 carries. He gained 61 yards rushing. He did nearly lose a fumble, but he looked good. Wendell Smallwood had 8 carries for just 24 yards, but he did have the beautiful 36-yard touchdown catch and run. And Corey Clement, essentially completely irrelevant, 4 carries for 6 yards plus 1 catch for -1 yard. So the Eagles have a bye next week. Talk to me about what you think the running game looks like in Week 10 against the Cowboys.
I mean, with the bye week here, it's almost like a chance for them to instill whatever they want in the running game. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to see them trade for a running back. I think at this point, I think they're a little let down. Josh Adams fumbled late in the game. It was overturned to where they said it wasn't a fumble, that he was actually down before. So that was like a moment where it was like, uh-oh, did Josh Adams just fumble away his opportunity? So I don't think they have the guy that they want in this offense. And we saw last year them trading for Jay Ajayi near the trade deadline so that they can boost that. They feel like they're contenders, and I don't know if they have that guy. I think today was somewhat of an audition for Josh Adams. He played well at Notre Dame, but again, my concern with him was that he looked really slow. He reminded me of like a Jeremy Hill type player, but like a little bit bigger than Jeremy Hill, and he's just very upright, relies on a really good offensive line, which Philadelphia does have, even though Lane Johnson went down in this game.
I think he may be out for a month is what I saw. I think it was something with an MCL.
Yeah, that's obviously a downgrade to that line. But yeah, I mean, Josh Adams is definitely worth an add to someone to look at for when they come back for their bye, because with the bye week, they can kind of do what they want and kind of work him into the offense the way they want to, work him into the game plan rather than doing it on such a short week. Because like in between football games, there's really not enough time for us to even research it, let alone for them to instill someone brand new and say, hey, we're going to make you the star of our offense.
Yeah, I'm still expecting a trade, but I just don't know exactly where it's coming from. There was a report this morning, I believe, from Adam Schefter that said LaShawn McCoy is not going to be traded, because why would you trade a 30-year-old running back when you're in a completely rebuilding mode? Apparently, he's not going to be traded. It could be Le'Veon Bell, but it doesn't sound like it, frankly, because he has to sign his tender first, so who knows at this point? So, frankly, if Josh Adams is out there, he needs to be a priority to pick up. Even, this is, by the way, what you can do when people are on their bye. This is really a time where if you have the room, if you can do smart roster management, you can really take advantage, because not that many people have the ability to pick up somebody who's going to be on a bye. So if you can, really add Josh Adams, because as of right now, I would expect him to be the most valuable Eagles running back going forward, absent a trade. Chiefs 30, Broncos 23 for the Chiefs. It's business as usual, man. Patrick Mahomes is just ridiculous. 4 more touchdowns. Kareem Hunt was solid, catches a touchdown pass and hurdles a defender. But what about Sammy Watkins? 9 targets, 8 catches, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's got 74 yards or more in 3 of his last 4 games. Is there anything more to him than just your garden variety wide receiver 3?
Oh man, he's got more upside than most people in that range, and I've been saying this, that the touchdowns were going to come. It's funny, I had my brother-in-law over for the games today, and we were talking about this, and I said that the Chiefs' defense playing against them is legitimately impossible to do, to game plan, because you have Tyreek Hill. If you put him in man coverage, you're done. You have to bracket him. You have to almost keep your free safety shaded to his side of the field. If you do that, that means the strong safety, how's he supposed to cover Travis Kelce? So you're going to trust a linebacker on Travis Kelce? Good luck with that. You're going to need to bring the strong safety down, which means that Sammy Watkins is going to be in man coverage most of the time, like one-on-one coverage. And when, like Sammy Watkins, he would be a number 1 in most offenses, and he's working out so well as the number 2 in this offense because he's seeing that single man coverage. He's not being bracketed, and they're giving him an opportunity to like put the ball in his hands and run with it afterwards. And both the touchdowns he had today were on like short crossing routes where it's just like he did it all after the catch. So Sammy Watkins, yeah, like he's in the wide receiver 3 territory, but he's got more upside than almost anybody in his range.
I think that really describes him well, because I feel like if I owned Sammy Watkins, I would probably be starting him every week, but he's not somebody even now who I can recommend you must start this guy every single week. A lot of it is just about how much Mahomes spreads the ball around. I mean, he throws to everybody. He throws to, backup wide receivers and everything like that in a regular day. So I agree. He's certainly a solid wide receiver 3, not a must start, but if you're looking for upside, he has almost as much as anybody in that range. On the Broncos side of the ball, no Royce Freeman in this one. Phillip Lindsay has a big game, 18 carries for 95 yards, and the touchdown. Devontae Booker fills the Royce Freeman role, and he does it well. 9 carries for 78 yards. But really, for me, I want to talk about the wide receivers. Demaryius Thomas leads the team in targets with 7, but just 3 catches for 30 yards. Courtland Sutton catches, only 4 targets, 3 catches for 78 yards. There's been all the talk about Demaryius Thomas getting traded, so there are 2-part question for you. Number 1, do you think Demaryius Thomas gets traded? And number 2, do you think that fantasy owners should pick up Courtland Sutton regardless?
I do think that Courtland Sutton should be added. We're going to find out before your waivers go through whether or not Demaryius Thomas is traded. Apparently the Patriots had conversations about trading for Demaryius Thomas, and that doesn't surprise me. Do I think that happens? No. I just don't know who trades for Demaryius Thomas right now. He's at the very end of his career. Again, going to a new offense for a wide receiver. Wide receivers getting traded is not something that interests me very much because, again, talking about Amari Cooper, as much as it's like he's going to be the guy. We know he's going to walk in and he's going to see, like, right out the gate, he's going to see an average of at least 8 targets per game because of the lack of talent in that offense. But if you're trading Thomas to a contender, I mean, like, he's going to walk into an offense that already has someone on there. He has no chemistry with that quarterback. He doesn't know the playbook. I mean, Demaryius Thomas, if you find someone that's willing to take him off your hands because they think he's going to get traded to the Patriots, do it. But I'm not expecting much here. But if he does get traded, obviously that's a big boost for Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, I think regardless of if Thomas gets traded, his value is really just very mediocre for the rest of the season. This is no longer a one-off for the Broncos. He's just, I mean, sometimes he's the most targeted receiver, other times he's not, but he is never the most productive receiver. It's not working for him in that offense. If he does get traded, I agree with you, which is why I'm not excited about the Amari Cooper trade. I mean, I guess maybe a slight bump in value, but for me, any receiver going over middle of the season to learn a new offense, you can maybe learn a handful of plays and be able to do it, but it's going to take a while to get sort of ingrained in a new offense. So I agree, Thomas outlook, regardless of the trade, I'm not too excited about it. And Sutton definitely intrigues me. He's got talent. They want him. They want to feature him more. I was a little disappointed to only see the 4 targets. I kind of expected a little more in a game that they were trailing, but in the end, he is productive, so I do think that he should be owned pretty much everywhere. Redskins 20, Giants 13. The game wasn't actually that close. Giants scored at the very end. Now, the Giants traded Snacks Harrison, which should have hurt their run defense, and it did. Adrian Peterson has a huge day, 26 carries, 149 yards, and a touchdown. Let me ask you something. You and I both have pretty consistently ranked him, at least rest of season, as a mid-tier RB2. Is he more RB1 at this point than RB2?
I don't know, man. He's like someone that I keep waiting for him to decline, but man, he just keeps overcoming it. Looked great again today, but the matchup today without Harrison, Ogletree was out for the Giants as well. That Giants team might be one that we just see kind of like fall apart like they did last year with the injuries and like with the coaching thing going on. And I mean, there's rumors that they're going to ship off more players. There's chances that Landon Collins apparently is I don't think that there's truth to that, but there's been speculation that he could be shopped. There's speculation that Odell Beckham could potentially be traded. There's just so many questions about this Giants team in general. So I don't know how much I want to take away from it, but Peterson, man.
He gets the Falcons next week, buddy. I mean, there's no reason that this is going to stop. And the one thing I do want to stress is this is not just like we're like, wow, I can't believe he had this production. Watch the game. Watch the film. He looks great. All right. I mean, you agree with that? This is not something where it's just like, well, they're feeding him the ball. He's getting 25 to 30 carries. No, he looks great. I'm as surprised as anyone, but I think this is going to continue. They have a relatively soft schedule next week against the Falcons. He's going to be a monster. So I don't know, man. I'm trying to restrain myself at this point, but I feel like I might have him maybe top 12 going forward, which is a little weird. The other thing I noticed about the Redskins in this game is that they're a very clear effort to get Jordan Reed involved. 12 targets, but 7 receptions, which is nice, but just 38 yards. Is Jordan Reed still above whatever line we want to call it, the line of we know we're going to start this guy, and if he's on my team, I'm just putting him in, versus every other tight end that is basically like, I'm just playing the matchup, so whatever?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like we talked about that this week, right? Where Jordan Reed, it was like I moved him down to where he was down at the bottom end of the tight end 1 range. He was still seeing targets, and it was like, okay, he's still a top 12 tight end on the year, okay, but he hasn't really had that breakout performance, and I'm waiting for it to happen because everything seems right about it. He's getting separation. He's in on plays. He started seeing some targets. Nothing's happening. Like it just for whatever reason, him and Alex Smith haven't clicked. I don't know what's going on there. It's the same offense that Jordan Reed's been a part of his entire career. But yeah, here's the issue. We thought CJ Uzomah, we thought that David Njoku, that these guys were going to be performers because they had great matchups this week. They both put up zeros. So it's like, I understand being frustrated with Jordan Reed. I really, 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 really do. But I mean, how many tight ends are you really comfortable with? Like Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, George Kittle, Eric Ebron has Jack Doyle coming back. So, I mean, does he start dipping in production? Like, it's frustrating, man, but I get it. But at the same time, I wouldn't drop Jordan Reed or anything like that.
No, for me, Jordan Reed is still, for whatever reason, at kind of, he's essentially the last of the, if I own this guy, I'm just starting him. And I'm not going to play the matchups because he is getting the targets. You have to assume that eventually something is going to happen with him. And like you just said, yeah, CJ Uzomah, 0 catches. David Njoku, 0 catches. It just was not a day for the
value tight ends.
Yes, exactly. How about on the other side of the ball, Giants? Any big takeaways? I mean, Odell had the good game. Saquon didn't find the end zone, but had the good game through the air. Any takeaways on the Giants side of the ball?
Not really.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm trying to get rid of anybody I can in this offense, because if they're going to keep playing Eli Manning, then I don't want a part of it, because it's going to be so inconsistent. And that's the thing, is like, the Giants have essentially admitted, that they are giving up on this season, that they're in rebuild mode. They've admitted that. Why are they still starting? I know the backlash that came from like benching Eli Manning last year, but that was for Geno Smith. We're not benching him for Geno Smith. We're benching him for Kyle Lauletta, who could be your future. Because, I mean, that's the thing. Like, are you just going to sit him on the bench all year behind Eli, play in the last game or two, and not really have any clue whether or not he's the guy, and then just draft a quarterback? There's just so many questions I have as to how they're handling the situation, but Eli Manning should not be their starting quarterback.
This is probably not a hot take, though it feels like it to say it. They're on a bye next week. I think Eli's benched in week 10. I think this is enough. They have no offensive line. He's running for his life, but he's playing terrible football right now. I mean, he's done. It's been pretty obvious to most people who watch football closely for a while. So I do think that it's going to be the bye week, and they're going to have a new starting quarterback in week 10. But we will find out. But I agree. Outside of that, I don't really think there's anything to take away on the Giants side of the ball. Bengals 37, Bucks 34. First of all, I think that, we both owe fantasy owners an apology. Last week, we both talked up Jameis Winston as somebody given his schedule, but he was truly, truly terrible in this game. I mean, he was missing wide open guys, 4 interceptions. He got benched in the second half. Dirk Cutter basically said, I really wanted to bench him earlier, but that bomb to Deshaun Jackson kind of changed my mind. Fitzmagic comes in, 11 completions of 15, 194 yards, 2 touchdowns. Who's the Bucs starting quarterback next week against the Panthers?
They haven't announced it. I have a feeling they're going to go back to Jameis. I think this was just kind of like, you're playing so bad, we don't have another choice. Like, we have to go with Fitzpatrick. I don't know, though. I think it's
Fitzmagic, man. I think at this point, they're still, you know what, I'm going to do whatever we think is going to give us the best chance of winning. And I think right now, it's hard to argue that that's not Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to disagree with you on that one, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, do they have to figure out whether Jameis is their future? Like, is that another situation where it's like, if we play Fitzpatrick, where are we at the end of the year? Like, Ryan Fitzpatrick is not our long-term solution, but what do we do with Jameis? I think they go back to Winston. I think they give him another shot. It's tough for people to think that after Fitzpatrick, like the way he's looked for most of the season, and like the game he struggled against the Bears. It's like, did you really expect him to have a good game when, like Khalil Mack was finding his way into the backfield like every other snap? It was just, that was like the heyday for the Bears defense where they were playing lights out. So Winston didn't play particularly well against the Bears either. So I think they should go with Fitzpatrick, but I do think it's going to be Winston under center.
Yeah, all right. I mean, it definitely could be. We have no idea. I do think they'll go with Fitz until they follow the playoff race and then go back to Winston. I guess, I don't know. It could be something where they're bouncing back and forth all season, because if you watched Fitzpatrick play enough, you know that the games, as great as these games are, there are plenty of terrible ones. So I could see it bouncing back all season. On the running game, Peyton Barber runs well. 19 carries, 85 yards, and a touchdown. The Bengals had plenty of injuries. Montez Burfict was out, yeah. But are we still stashing Ronald Jones, or has Barber done enough now to kind of keep his job for the foreseeable future?
Well, Ronald Jones hurt. He got hurt in this game. It's a hamstring injury. So, yeah, I think Ronald Jones should be considered droppable, and I think Peyton Barber is the starter for the foreseeable future, and that Ronald Jones, any momentum that he had, he just lost. And it's very possible that he sits out the next couple weeks. Ronald Jones essentially droppable right now. Peyton Barber is going to be like that Isaiah Crowell type running back in your lineup, where you kind of just put him in there and he's going to get some volume, and you just hope for the best.
Yeah, my bad. I was not watching this game. I did not see that Ronald Jones was injured, so that certainly cements Peyton Barber as somebody who's going to be a regular starter. Not a fantastic matchup next week against the Panthers, but certainly somebody who's going to be getting the majority of carries, and anybody like that factors into your fantasy analysis. On the Bengals side of the ball, look, there just is no better matchup for opposing offenses than the Bucs right now. They allowed the most points in the NFL, especially in this game. They were down Quan Alexander, Gerald McCoy, Vinny Curry. Everybody has a big game in this game. Mixon, Boyd, AJ Green, basically everyone essentially, other than, as we said, CJ Uzomah, who does not catch a pass. Any takeaways from this, or is this like, yeah, sure, this is a great matchup? Of course they dominated.
I know people are going to look at Joe Mixon and be like, yeah, we knew this was going to be a big game. The Bengals, I'm still convinced they have no idea what they have in Joe Mixon. None. They have no idea what they have, because every time I sit down and I watch the Bengals, like today I made it a point to watch a lot of this game. It was obviously one that was projected to be high scoring too. And, Mixon, every single time he catches the ball out of the backfield, it's when Andy Dalton goes through all of his other options and it's like, oh crap, I have to check the ball down. And he throws it off to the sideline where it's like a 1 yard average depth of target or something like that for Joe Mixon. And it's like all of a sudden there's 3 guys closing in on him. It's like we all watched that game with the Giants and the Falcons, right? Where Saquon Barkley would catch the ball and there's 3 guys on him. That's essentially what they're doing with Joe Mixon over and over and over again. They are not designing any pass plays for him. And that's a problem for me because Joe Mixon might be one of the best receiving backs in the game. He reminded me so much of Matt Forte coming out that I really wanted to see them use him in that way because in the preseason they were doing that. Again, I know Mixon has a big game here, but he could be so much more.
Well, hopefully they can figure all that out on their bye next week because I agree Mixon is fantastic and I have never felt like they have really understood how to utilize him in the most effective manner. So hopefully they can kind of do something with that, but considering Marvin Lewis is the coach, I am not particularly optimistic on it. Seahawks 28, Lions 14. There's a lot to talk about on the Seahawks side of the ball. Let's just start with Doug Baldwin. I mean, I thought this might be a decent spot for him because Darius Slay doesn't usually play in the slot, but just 3 targets, 2 catches, 26 yards. Concern going forward?
I don't want to say concerned because Russell Wilson threw the ball 17 times. I mean, I like Doug Baldwin this week, and I thought he was a fantastic start, not only in season long, but in DFS. But if you were to tell me that Russell Wilson was going to throw 4 touchdowns, 1 got called back because of a penalty, I would have said, yeah, Doug Baldwin's a play. Like, play him. I didn't think there was any way that Seattle would be throwing the ball just 17 times, but here we are. And David Moore.
Let's talk about that for a second because, frankly, Russell Wilson the last 3 games, he's been between 17 and 23. I was going to ask you about Russell Wilson in particular because are we just willing to accept for him that this is what he's going to be able to do, a really valuable quarterback who throws 3 touchdown passes a game, throwing between 17 and 23 times a game and not running at all? Are we willing just to accept that this guy is going to be what he is when his whole value in the past has been largely tied to his legs and a big volume and stuff like that?
Well, people forget that he actually led the NFL in passing touchdowns last year. So Russell Wilson, I do think this is what you're going to get going forward. And shout out to the podcast league that I have, the listener league, where one of the guys I'm in the league with, he basically had 3 quarterbacks in his roster. He thought he was going to be able to trade one because he grabbed him off waivers, yada, yada. He basically wanted to know who he should keep going forward. I can't remember who the first one was, but then it came down to that person, Goff, and Russell Wilson. And I said I'd probably rather drop Jared Goff than Russell Wilson, just because Jared Goff is not going to be relied upon. Like, he's not going to have much volume. Todd Gurley's going to steal a lot of those touchdowns. Whereas Russell Wilson has been a guy who's historically started the year really slow, and he comes on. Like, I've dissected it. Like, I've gone through those numbers in the primer before, talking about Wilson, how slow he is at the start of seasons. And over the second half of the season, there's like no better quarterback in football. So Russell Wilson's somebody who I liked for a second half resurgence, and it kind of started before I thought it would. And I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, do you think that the Seattle Seahawks defense is as good as they've played? Because they've been playing lights out.
Yeah, they have been playing well. I part of the problem I really think is they're just a very run heavy team at this point.
Brian Schottenheimer.
I know, that's right. He wants to set football back, 15 years. 25 carries for Chris Carson. Mike Davis gets another 10 carries.
Rashad Penny gets no touches again.
Right, of course, right. If you're thinking, I don't know, man. If you're thinking about him, forget about it because the Seahawks clearly aren't. Well, let's briefly, before we go anywhere, finish your thought on Baldwin because I kind of interrupted you. So you essentially what it sounded like is you're saying like, look, he threw 17 times. What do you want? I'm not going to be concerned about Doug Baldwin.
Yeah, basically it was a touchdown or bust for almost everybody in this offense today. Like Tyler Lockett, they're not talking about him right now that they're worried about him because one of his 2 catches, he had a touchdown, and that could have been Doug Baldwin. So I'm not really worried about it. Do I think David Moore is a real thing? Nah, not really. It is a little worrisome, the small volume, the how much, like how well their defense is playing, because I was relying on the Lions to put up some points on the Seahawks today. Like, I really did not think their defense was going to hold them in check, but there's so many problems in the Lions side of the ball. But yeah, it's definitely worrisome. Doug Baldwin's, he's probably in the wide receiver 3 conversation for the rest of the year because guys in that range don't perform on a weekly basis, but you know that they have it in them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm willing certainly to no longer consider him an absolute, I have this guy. I'm certainly keeping him in my lineup at this point. I think he's in that group where you can say, you know what, I just don't feel good about this matchup. I'm going to leave him on my bench, and I think that's fine. On the Lions side of the ball, as you mentioned, a little bit of a mess. They kind of abandoned the run early. Kerryon Johnson gets just 8 carries. He does have 6 catches for 69 yards. Theo Riddick was out again, so I'm not sure whether or not he would have gotten that volume going forward. The receivers, Marvin Jones has a huge game with the 2 touchdown catches. Golden Tate has 12 targets, 7 catches for 50 yards. Kenny Golladay, just 1 target, 1 catch for 12 yards. You just continue to start all 3 Lions wide receivers each week or what?
Yeah, I think you do. This is like one of those weeks. It reminds me of that week 1 game against the Jets where Matt Stafford just had a really bad game. And it's not to say that he had a terrible game in this one, but it just nothing felt right. Like Kenny Golladay getting 1 target. Like, what are we talking about? There's no lockdown corner on the Seahawks anymore, guys. Like Shaquille Griffin has been burned over and over in coverage this year. Like, I don't know what happened in this game. Like, this is one I'm going to go back and watch because I need to figure out what happened with Golladay. Why didn't he get targets? Was he limited? What was the snap counts? Like, go through all that stuff because it makes no sense.
Right. At this point, I mean, look, from what little I saw of it, and I flip back and forth, as I'm sure you do, Matthew Stafford just looked completely uncomfortable the whole game.
That's the best way to put it, because I don't want to say he played a terrible game, but he didn't play a very good one either.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, it doesn't get all that much easier. They're at the Vikings next week, so I'm not really sure. But I agree. Again, they're kind of, Tate is somebody, especially in any league that awards anything for receptions. He's pretty much a must-start option. Marvin Jones is a guy who, I own him on a bunch of teams, and he was on my bench most points because he's touchdown or bust. Kind of, he has the huge game, but I would not expect that every single week. And Golladay, I don't know. Again, it's something we're going to have to watch the tape, but I am a little worried about them going forward. Bears 24, Jets 10. No Allen Robinson or Khalil Mack in this one, but the Bears really didn't need either one of them. And in fact, frankly, the Jets are so decimated in receiver and everything like that, and the Bears kind of really did not have to worry about it. You talked about Mitch Trubisky. Why don't you just give me your takeaways, if any, from the Bears side of the ball first?
Wasn't much to take away from this game. A lot of people are going to wonder if Jordan Howard is a buy. I don't think so. I'm kind of moving on. Like, watching Jordan Howard in this offense, it just doesn't click. And knowing that Kyle Long, one of their guards today, went down with a foot injury that looks to be pretty serious. The offensive line, they just haven't been getting very much push up front, and knowing that they might have to go to a backup there, I just don't think it's a great scenario for him. I just don't think the offense fits Jordan Howard. And the thing is like, it was a conversation I had today where it was like, do the Bears trade away Jordan Howard because he would fit really well with the Eagles, right? Like, you think about stuff like that, but then you think, well, the Bears have no depth behind Tariq Cohen. You're not going to have Benny Cunningham out there. You're not going to have, a Terrell Mizell out there. Like, there's no depth on the roster, so they can't trade away Jordan Howard, but he clearly doesn't fit in this offense. Tariq Cohen would have been used a lot more had the game been close, but it was just a very boring game.
Yeah, it really was, and it was never in doubt. Frankly, the Jets had no chance of threatening on offense whatsoever. And I agree with you on Howard. I was kind of surprised that his overall numbers seemed decent. I mean, he had 22 carries, but I was surprised that he had 81 yards because he did not look particularly good. He does get the touchdown. But again, it was mostly kind of game script where they didn't really need to do anything, so they just let him go. Look, on the Jets side of the ball, is there any reason to talk about it? Deontay Burnett was the leading receiver for the Jets. If you know who that is, congratulations. You probably work in football.
I do.
Well, you do, but if not, you probably write for a fantasy website or work in football. Yeah, is there anything that you want to talk about with the Jets? Because there wasn't anything for me.
No, there's nothing. I mean, you can take away the fact that Trenton Cannon played, I think it was a couple more snaps than Isaiah Crowell, or a couple less. I can't remember what it was, but that Elijah McGuire is coming back, and I think Elijah McGuire is someone that I would add.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with that. Certainly, Trenton Cannon is not the guy with Bilal Powell out for the year. And again, Isaiah Crowell, this is what we've said, and the haters like to yell at you when he has that big game, but he is not. I mean, the Bears have a great defense, but Isaiah Crowell, especially battling the foot injury, is not somebody who you're going to want to rely on going forward week in and week out. Panthers 36, Ravens 21. We did talk about Christian McCaffrey already, so again, you see the big line score. Again, at least one of those was a complete fluke, so don't really worry. Let's talk about the guy who you mentioned in your Saturday article of early waiver wire stashes. I retweeted this article. This is the article that you want to check on because it's a way to get ahead, and legitimately I picked up DJ Moore last night because I knew that nobody would be on him, and he has a huge game here. 6 targets, 5 catches for 90 yards, plus 2 carries for 39 yards. The Panthers play the Bucs next week. Is he a must-add for you?
Yeah, that's why he was in this article. Like, obviously going up against the Bucs is great for anybody, but DJ Moore has been someone who's been kind of coming on my radar the last couple weeks, and I finally was willing to bite the bullet, and I actually started him in one game this week just because I knew that they weren't going to be able to run the ball very well against Baltimore. And DJ Moore is like the kind of guy, they're doing some gadget plays to get the ball in his hands, and he's been doing really well running after the catch. It happened again today, 90 yards on 5 catches in a tough matchup against Baltimore. But again, they're doing the thing where they're getting the ball in his hands. His snap counts have been on the rise, but they hadn't been like through the roof, like astronomical. And that's why people have like stayed away from from him. But if you looked, when he's on the field, he was getting touches. So knowing that Torrey Smith was going to be out, it was like, okay, he's going to get more snaps. And when he's on the field, he's getting touches. So why not give him an opportunity? And again, going into that matchup against the Bucs just allow across the board. They're a terrible defense. So, DJ Moore is definitely someone that you can add. And if you're, there's 6 teams on bye in week 9. So you're probably going to be in a position where you're looking for someone, and DJ Moore can definitely fill that role.
100%. And that is why if you were looking ahead and it's roster management, pick him up before this game. And if he has the big game, especially, but given his matchup, you get to avoid sort of the fab bidding that's going to go on for him because he should be a prime ad. On the Ravens side of the ball, tags, I didn't really see much of a takeaway here. They did absolutely nothing in the passing game. They were playing from behind. Alex Collins had the nice touchdown run. He did fumble, as I mentioned, but he continued to see carries after that, and it wasn't really his fault. Is there anything you want to talk about on the Ravens side?
Yeah, some people are going to be worried about the Alex Collins thing, but I'm not. So I watched an interview with Harbaugh a couple weeks ago, and he said that, someone asked him about the Collins fumbling. Is it an issue? And he's like, it's obviously not ideal. We've talked to Alex about that, but he's like, the thing is you have to consider the pros and cons of having someone like Alex Collins. His running style is going to naturally make him more prone to fumbles. It's going to happen. And like looking at this game, that fumble the ball that he did lose, he was hit as he was handed it to him. Like there was nothing, I want to say there was nothing he could have done about it because he never really got the ball fully in his hands before the defensive tackle was literally just sticking his helmet into his chest. So I'm not worried about Alex Collins so much. It's just more worried about like who's going to get the goal line carries and this and that. And that's why he's just so frustrating to me. But I'm not worried about the fumbling issue.
Well, as I said, never going to give him up. Yeah, I'm sticking with him. I kind of like him going forward, and I was encouraged to see him still get carries after that, which, again, it was not his fault. He was completely blown up in the backfield. Frankly, I didn't even think they had to credit him with the fumble necessarily because he barely had it. Steelers 33, Browns 18. I feel so terrible for the Browns defense because they are just totally exhausted right from the start of that game. Given all the overtime games. Antonio Brown scores 2 touchdowns. James Conner with an absolutely huge effort. We talk about every week. I don't want to belabor it. You and I, Tags, have in our rest of season rankings have been pretty far apart, probably more than any players on the remaining value of Le'Veon Bell and James Conner. I think Le'Veon Bell is coming back in week 10. I would not be surprised if he does not see meaningful work until week 13 or 14. I think Conner has done more than enough to earn the right to basically have this backfield at this point going forward.
Here's the question though. Like this is like an ongoing conversation with my wife and I because she's like, she has Le'Veon Bell in our dynasty league and our home one. And then she's like, what's James Conner? What's this going to mean for him when he comes back? And so many people are quick to say that it's going to be a timeshare, but I don't know. Like, 'cause the thing is like when you look at Pittsburgh, they have not had a multi-back system in a long time. And I know some people are going to say, well, they haven't had James Conner. I disagree. If you go back to D'Angelo Williams, he was playing out of his freaking mind when Le'Veon Bell was out a couple years ago. Le'Veon Bell came back. Legitimately, D'Angelo Williams went back to a 5-touch role. 5 touch a week. That was all he was getting. And do I think that it changes with Randy Fichtner? I don't know. I can't answer that question. But this is an offense. They do run a lot of no huddle. They don't want to run subs on and off the field. We have no idea if that would take, the wind out of Le'Veon Bell's wings. I don't know. It's so hard to answer. But for me, ideally, I just get out of the situation altogether.
I think it's fair, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but for me, frankly, even if what you're saying is true, which it might be, why does that necessarily mean that Le'Veon Bell is the one who's getting the carries? And I get it, Le'Veon Bell is incredible, but Conner, a lot of the metrics have shown that Conner's performance has been nearly as good as what Bell has done, and they hate Bell right now. They are really pissed about this situation. So I could see them saying, like, great, come on back, fine, you can sit out the whole year, but I don't know if they can put him on that 2-week exemption list. I don't exactly remember what the situation is at this point because I talk about it pretty much nonstop. But for me, if I own Conner, and I do in a couple of leagues, I'm banking on rest of season production. And I could be wrong, but that's sort of where I am. And this game only further kind of cements that. What about on the Brown side of the ball, Tags? What do you want to take away here? Bad. Is that your takeaway? Bad? Because that's my takeaway.
So bad. Nick Chubb, it was always going to be a tough matchup for him. I didn't love Nick Chubb this week. Jarvis Landry really let down. It's just like a continuing thing. It's like a Nelson Aguilar type line. 12 targets, 8 catches for 39 yards. Like what?
P.S. That led the team, just so you know. 39 receiving yards led the team.
Yeah, what is that? Like Baker Mayfield, like this offense is just not working right now. Apparently the Browns are looking into firing Todd Haley instead of Hugh Jackson. I don't know why you don't just clean house.
No, you need more Hugh Jackson Tags.
Obviously.
That is what the solution to all the problems are. I mean, it's just a mess right now, and it's really especially Njoku, who we had talked about. Now he did see an end zone target at one point, and I think there was a penalty on it where he was just double teamed and getting manhandled. So I mean, it's not as if he was totally ignored, but a really disappointing effort from him, and a really disappointing effort, frankly, from the entire Browns team. Overall, I kind of expected more. They are hosting the Chiefs. They're going to need points next week, so we'll see what that can do, but certainly disappointing. Colts 42, Raiders 28. This was just wrapping up. We were done. Marlon Mack, 25 carries for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. We talked about him last week. We are buyers into this. We had him as a strong RB2. The thing I do want to focus on, and you briefly touched on it, was the tight ends. Eric Ebron catches another touchdown pass. He was on one of my guys who I thought would have a big decline in performance on the second half of the season. He does catch another touchdown pass. Just 3 catches on 3 targets for 37 yards. Jack Doyle returned, as you mentioned, sees 7 targets, 6 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. I mean, what do you think about the two going forward?
It's clearly Doyle, man. Like, this goes back to week 1 and 2 where we were talking about it, and like, so Eric Ebron was playing essentially like 1/3 of the snaps that Jack Doyle was. So it was like, yeah, we understand that he's gotten touchdowns. That's fine, but you can't rely on that over and over and over. It's not to say both can't be fantasy viable. That's a different conversation, because they definitely both can be with Andrew Luck under the helm, with him throwing 3 or 4 touchdowns seemingly every week now. But Jack Doyle, off a 5-week absence, walks back into the offense, gets 7 targets, catches 6 of them for 70 yards and a touchdown. He's back. He's a safety blanket. He's almost like an every week start for me. He's one of those guys at tight end now where I think you can consider, I wanted to see him back for a week and see how everything went. And clearly he walked right back into the role he had before he left.
Yeah, I agree. And they have a bye next week, so he has an extra chance just to relax. They can get him totally back into the offense. I think Ebron is going to be fine as one of those, guys you can probably start most weeks, but I certainly think he loses values. Are you concerned at all about T.Y. Hilton, just 1 catch on 5 targets for 34 yards?
I am a little bit. I mean, I'm not overly concerned because Andrew Luck obviously had a crazy efficient day. So knowing that Luck's throwing the ball well doesn't worry me so much. What worries me a little bit is just the fact that the Raiders were missing one of the starting safeties this week. They had Rashaan Melvin inactive, who I would consider to be their best cornerback. They also had allowed the most 40-plus yard plays in the NFL coming into this game. So it was like there were so many things that added up for Hilton to have a big day, and he didn't. But, I mean, I'm not going to argue with the Colts game plan. They scored 42 points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They certainly had this game pretty well in hand. It got close at one point. I believe it might have been tied at some point, but they looked great on offense overall. Not surprising given what the Raiders defense is. On the other side of the ball, I mean, Doug Martin, it's a good matchup. The Colts struggle to stop the run, but he runs well. 12 carries for 72 yards. He does lose a fumble. Jalen Richard has 8 catches. It's basically what we kind of expected. Martin would get the big workload out of the running game while Richard would factor into the passing game. Jared Cook scores the touchdown, gets more involved. Jordy Nelson, just 1 catch on 4 targets for 14 yards. That was surprising to me considering the Amari Cooper trade.
Yeah, definitely. I said I didn't want a part of this offense. Martavis Bryant was somebody that I was willing to throw in a couple tournament lineups just because, like, hey, the Colts, without Malik Hooker back there at free safety, he was out for this game. It's like, take advantage of him deep. He didn't see a single target. Like, what are we talking about? Like, Brandon LaFell played over him. Brandon LaFell is starting in 2 wide receiver sets again. This is such a John Gruden move, though. Like, we should have known this was coming. LaFell is over 28 years old. That was obvious.
Yeah. I mean, Seth Roberts and Brandon LaFell with the touchdowns. That's kind of what we all expected, right?
Oh, my God. Yeah, Bobby and I said an over-under on this one. We talked about it on the podcast last week that Jalen Richard, we were saying over-under, was it 5 or 6 receptions? And I said over.
I think it was 5.5.
Yeah, we said over for sure, and he ended up with 8 catches, so yeah.
Yeah, no, they were playing from behind, so this is probably around what you're going to expect, I would assume. Doug Martin's probably going to get 12 to 15 carries. And they play the 49ers next week, so not a terrible matchup.
Oh, hey, real quick, a name to put on your waiver wire radar is Dontrell Inman. I watched a lot of this game, and Dontrell Inman looked really good. He may have stolen the job from Ryan Grant, who has not been very good this year. And even Chester Rogers went down to 1 target in the game. Dontrell Inman looked like a player again, man.
Yeah, that was surprising to me because it was one of the games I wasn't watching it all that closely, and I kept seeing receptions, and then I kept hearing Dontrell Inman's name, and it was shocking. Yeah, he did look good. I was surprised because I thought it might have been Ryan Grant. I mean, I wasn't really paying attention, but yeah, that's a good call there, and I'm sure you and Bobby will discuss it on the Waiver Wire show. The game that was still going on but is now over, Rams 29. Packers 27. I mean, Tags Gurley has just 1 touchdown droppable, or are we? Yeah, no. Obviously, the entire Rams offense is just awesome. We basically do this every week. Tags, the Rams offense is awesome. Do you want to say anything else?
No.
No, me neither. Okay, on the Packers side of the ball, Aaron Jones finally gets the work. 12 carries, 86 yards on the touchdown. Jamal Williams also gets a touchdown, but just 4 carries. Is this finally the coming out party for Aaron Jones? Are we finally turning it over?
I think we do see a little bit turning of the tide here because, so first off, Jamal Williams, 4 carries, that's obviously nothing. We've seen Aaron Jones consistently get one more touch than him every single week, like for the last 3 weeks. So to see him out touch him here in a big way, like he also had 2 receptions. Jamal Williams didn't have any. So like, this is a big development here because they're coming off their bye week, and it looks like they've instilled Aaron Jones as their primary running back with Jamal Williams and kind of like give him a breather type role. And on top of that, Ty Montgomery, while we were recording, he fumbled the ball and like he basically gave the win to the Rams in this game. He's the reason that they lost. I mean, I don't want to say the reason they lost because it shouldn't come down to one play, but the Packers were going to have the ball with, I want to say it was like 40 seconds to go. I could be wrong on this. Again, we were recording, but Montgomery fumbled the ball and they lost it. Obviously, Rams kneel on it.
I think it was closer to 2 minutes, Tags. I had plenty of time to go down there and try to kick the winning field goal, but that fumble certainly does him in. So hopefully this is finally the Aaron Jones breakout that we've been waiting for. For the passing side, Davante Adams has a huge game. Nobody else really goes crazy. You know, in the end, it is what it is. We talked about Geronimo Allison already. Cardinals 18 and the 49ers 15. And let me tell you something, okay? I am really mad because Kyle Shanahan is a liar, okay? Because Raheem Mostert, I had him basically started in every single league. Matt Breida was supposed to be limited. Matt Breida basically dominated the entire game on that side of the ball. So talk about the 49ers. Any takeaways that you want to have?
There were so many questions about Mostert in the chat this morning on the live stream that I do. And I kind of said Mostert fell down on my radar. Like I had him as like a high-end RB3 this week and one that I felt pretty good about. Like there obviously was some risk knowing that Alfred Morris could take some carries, that Kyle Juszczyk could steal some passing down work. But the matchup against the Cardinals was pristine. Like you couldn't have asked for a better matchup for him. And then when we found out Matt Breida was playing, it was kind of like, oh, we already knew there was some risk. This is just going to add some more in there. I still thought I preferred Mostert over Breida this week because like Breida's continually played through these injuries and he keeps getting hurt and I had no idea why. I mean, he averaged 2.6 yards per carry today. It's not like he was extremely effective that you needed to keep giving him the ball. Raheem Mostert, 2 carries for 18 yards. I don't know. I know we give Kyle Shanahan a lot of credit, but there's been some questionable decisions here recently.
Yeah, and I also just don't get it. The guy is basically knocked out of every single game, and he doesn't practice, and he looks like he's going to miss it, and suddenly, remarkably, he plays and he gets a full workload. I mean, he got 16 carries today for 42 yards. You know, Mostert got 2. Alfred Morris got 6. It doesn't really make much sense to me. George Kittle continues to, you know, do well for a tight end. 8 targets, 5 catches for 57 yards. Let me ask something. Marquise Goodwin, he gets 4 targets. He has 1 catch. It's the bomb for the touchdown. How do you view a guy like Marquise Goodwin going forward where he has the explosive ability, but he, you know, to me, I will never start Marquise Goodwin. I don't know about you.
He was a bye week filler. That's it. Like I have him in my rest of season rankings. He's outside of my top 50 wide receivers. I don't want to own him.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's just not somebody who you're going to be able to rely on. He's going to be big play dependent, and that's going to happen sometimes, but I'm not going to feel bad if I leave him on my bench. On the Cardinals side of the ball, Larry Fitz looks healthy, finally. 12 targets, 8 receptions, 102 yards, and a touchdown. How are you feeling about him going forward?
I mean, this is really good for him. Like, Byron Leftwich taking over as the play caller was something that we didn't know how it would go. You know, it was the first time, like, he's ever called plays, and it was like, okay, how's he going to do it? David Johnson ends up with 41 yards through the air. I think that ties a season high, so it's not like great things out of him, but they did line him up at wide receiver a couple times, which is always a good thing. But Larry Fitzgerald, knowing he got 12 targets in the first game as with Leftwich as the coordinator, it kind of tells you something going forward, that Larry Fitzgerald is going to be a focal point of this offense. Not to say that they move the ball extremely well. Josh Rosen, he just looks lost at times, man. And I know this is probably his best stat line that he's ever posted, but I didn't watch this entire game. Like, it wasn't one of the chosen games I put on the screens, but when I did watch some of this game, I just walk away thinking that Rosen, he plays behind a bad offensive line, so I'm not going to put all the blame on him, but sometimes he just looks like he's completely lost. He makes some bad decisions just trying to save himself of a sack, and it turns into some bad things. But yeah, Larry Fitzgerald clearly going to be involved. Christian Kirk still sees 7 targets, but yeah, Fitz.
He does catch a touchdown pass, at least, Christian Kirk, which was nice to see.
The thing you need to pay attention to here is like it could be a trend with Leftwich, with Larry Fitzgerald getting healthier, obviously being involved in the game plan, seeing a season high 12 targets, catching, you know, for 102 yards and a touchdown. This is something to watch going forward, and I am definitely going to be moving Larry Fitzgerald ahead of Christian Kirk, whereas going into this week, it was something that was very close.
Yep, I completely agree with that, and I think it was for two reasons. One, Leftwich essentially came out and said, we have to make Larry Fitzgerald more of a focal point. But for me, really, I think Fitzgerald is finally healthy. I think that's why his targets have gone up more and more. I think he had 8 each of the previous 2 weeks, now 12. He looked good today. Because he started, I think he takes Wednesdays off generally now, but then he gets back into it. And I think, frankly, he's over whatever, back issues or whatever was plaguing him. So I agree. And with David Johnson, yes, I think that is the most important thing to take away, which is that he was certainly lining up as a wide receiver. And, his numbers aren't overwhelming today, but I do think the switch to Leftwich, as I had sort of prayed for on last week's show, is going to mean good things for him. All right, Tags, that's it for today's show. But before we go, I do want to remind everyone to go to fantasypros.com/contest to get entered into the signed Davante Adams helmet giveaway. And I do want to say a quick thank you again to the sponsor of today's show, Pristine Auction. Remember, they have a ton of great items up for auction every day, so make sure to check them out at PRISTINE auction.com. On behalf of everyone here at Fantasy Pros, thanks for listening. Enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.